Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien, personal development coach, heart math practitioner, dog photographer, and entrepreneur. In this podcast, I share tools, strategies, and amazing guest interviews to help you improve your mindset and your well-being with a sprinkle of fun and probably some mention of dogs along the way. So without further ado, let's squeeze the day. Hi folks, welcome to episode 39 of the podcast. Today, my guest is Maya Mendoza, and we're talking about how to break the pattern of self-sabotage. First up, a little bit about Maya. Maya is known as the healer's healer. She has over 30 years experience living, working, and teaching in the world of intuitive and emotional medicine, and lives as a spiritual business mentor, intuitive healer, medium, and emotional alchemist. After a near-death experience at age 9, Maya was able to see people's auras and sense their emotional energy. This skill has helped her go deeper than most and identify the hidden causes of both physical and psycho-spiritual disease. Maya is the author of 3 personal development books and the creator of Metascape Method, a unique process of therapeutic shamanism and entranced storytelling. A specialist in helping clients identify their core roots of trauma, pain, and shame, she's helped thousands change and rewire their epigenetic history and break free from physical and emotional self-sabotage patterns so they can step forward freely and confidently into healthy, rewarding, abundant lives beyond their wildest dreams. Welcome to the podcast, Maya.
Thank you for inviting me, Emma.
So today we're going to be talking about self-sabotage, which I know is something I can 100% relate to. I've been doing a lot of my own work on identifying my patterns and doing my best to heal them and get rid of them. But what does it mean from your point of view to self-sabotage?
Well, the first thing, excuse me, I was starting talking and suddenly my voice is going. Self-sabotage, I think it's an interesting concept, because I don't believe in self-sabotage in the way that it's generally described or thought of. So for me, self-sabotage is very much about unmet needs, about an aspect of you or parts of yourself that have not been fully actualized. And generally speaking, these parts are formed before we're 4 years old, when we are rather narcissistic in our approach to life. And again, when I say to people, most adults do not understand that the first formative years of their lives are utterly self-centered, and they have no empathy with anything outside of themselves, no capacity to reason or ration. Sorry, another word, but anyway. And so what happens is that we make up who we are, we make up what the world is, and they are a set of rules that we filter every experience through, right? And because we are filtering through a very narrow band of experience, our brain, the parts that want to keep us safe, do not have the mechanism to change the behavior. So when people come up against these patterns, these so-called self-sabotage patterns, they're actually your mind and your body attempting to keep you safe. So rather than it being about self-sabotage, it's about protection. That's the first thing. And secondly, that is the nature of being human, to survive. So unless one understands how to not so much bypass the limbic system, which is and the amygdala in the center of the brain, it's a matter of discovering what the unmet need is that's looking to be expressed or hasn't been heard. And when that is satisfied, change naturally can take place. But whilst we're beating ourselves up for not being good enough and not being able to get to the goal that we want, without understanding that we're trying to be adults and live our adult destiny through our childhood archetypes, it just doesn't work.
No, and it's very interesting because I think the the two examples of self-sabotage that come up that I know of from talking to other people are, one of them is around money. So I know a very common thing is for people who have a really good money month to either manifest a giant unexpected bill, or to find a way to, as quickly as possible, get rid of the money, overspending or what have you, and then sitting and going, oh my God, why did I do that? And the other one that springs to mind is setting goals and then just not doing anything to meet them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting, this thing with money, isn't it? Because people talk about glass ceilings and money ceilings, and that thing that we get, what are we allowed or not allowed to have, and what does it mean to have more, and what does that mean about us, and where's all the programming. So it's very interesting, because I come from a family basically of immigrants on both sides, and immigrants tend to land and work really, really hard to make their way. And very often the original, the grandparents, let's say, do with a lot less than their children, and then their children focus on supporting their children, and etc., etc. And what happens is you end up with this whole programming ancestrally of what you're permitted to have, and what you're permitted what not to have, and what money actually means. So because we make money mean power and status and security, it's never actually about creativity and abundance, ever. And that's where people come up against these so-called self-sabotage, unmet needs. Am I allowed to have fun?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to have joy? Am I allowed to make my own decision about what it is that I am going to do for the rest of my life in a career? Because I must repay my parents, and I must prepare for my kids to have the foundations that they need. So you end up with generations with this structure, this internal structure of constraint.
Yeah.
And what everyone, it is breakable, by the way. It is a breakable pattern.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
which I want to ask you about, because the thing that pops into my head when we talk about ancestral programming, because that's very interesting, and I think it's a very common reason for people to sabotage themselves. Beliefs such as I can't make more money than my parents, and things like that are ones that I've heard. Something that springs to mind for me, and it's one that I've had to work very hard on, is you have to work really hard for money, or you have to struggle for money. And if it isn't a struggle, there's something wrong, so you create a struggle, or you just keep yourself in this pattern of constantly working, which is what I did up until I made some changes. When I hit burnout in 2016, I had been on this treadmill for over a decade of believing that I had to work 7 days a week. It had to be really hard. And if I hadn't kind of almost suffered for it, I didn't deserve it. And also, ironically, I was working all these hours and I was constantly broke all the time. So
That's a tough pattern.
It is a tough pattern. So say a bit more, please, about how one could go about breaking these ancestral patterns.
Let me just, there's several different processes that we can have a look at here, right? And the first one is self-awareness, is understanding that this is the thing that you do, and understanding. I mean, I'm going actually, when you started talking, part of me inside was laughing with glee at what you were telling me, right? And I'll tell you why, because we all know if that pattern of work hard had the results, we would all be comfortable and secure financially, right? Okay, so there is a misunderstanding from not just of hard work, but of this idea of creating and manifesting your future. There is a misunderstanding of where to place your mind and your heart in order to create for the sake of creating. All right. So I'm going to tell you, I also used to have this up and down swinging financially. Okay. And for me, I realized last year that the reason that I would create money, not spend it, not enjoy it, save it, because I have a chronic condition, and I've had a chronic condition since I was a child. So I would save money for the years when I couldn't work because I was physically disabled, right? So for me, it wasn't that the income level dropped, but I would work really hard and I'd build it up, and then there would be this physical crash, like you said, with burnout. It would be for me lupus or the thyroid or something, right? And it would then go to a flat line of income, and then I'd live off the savings. And just at the point where things were going to be disastrous, something would happen and there would be a plonk of money, and then oh, that's lovely, now I know I'm getting better and I can work again, right? So it was, for me, I had to decommission that part of me that was working to conserve myself when I was sick.
Yeah.
Sounds counterintuitive, right? So I had to sit back and go, I must play, I must be joyful, and I must have an absence of fear of illness in myself, and trust that if I fall down, that there will be somebody to pick me up if I can't pick myself up. And in that process, I have discovered for myself that the most important thing that we have to do to remove these patterns is create a sense of inner security, certainty, and safety. And if that is the first approach, which again is doable if you know what you're doing, we can have a discussion about that in a minute as well, right? So that this thing of safety, security, certainty, that's so deeply ingrained that when these patterns show up, you can give it to the pattern as you would cuddle a child who'd just fallen down and grazed its knee, or pop a lollipop in a chattering monkey's mouth. Just that's my approach in with the Metascape work and the entrancement work, is we find out what the mechanism is. We don't have to discuss content at all. We find the mechanism, we go into it metaphorically, and we begin a shamanic storytelling journey, and with the healing metaphors already generated, and then we apply the metaphors to the event, to the part, allowing the superconscious aspect, the part of oneself that knows everything, to come in and help all the fragmented pieces come together and work as a team. Somebody said to me, you can't have we can't build a football team because everybody wants to be the star shooter, right? So on all your internal parts that are seeking attention want to be heard, and therefore they push all the other parts out of the way until they're triggered. So you cannot have symphony and harmony within the self and safety whilst the internal aspect of yourself or aspects of yourself are actually in friction or at war. So that's partly safety, security, certainty, and then the other thing is setting up within oneself a mechanism for cooperation and collaboration, right? And once you have those two things in place, and you know how to let go and you know how to receive, the mechanisms can be dissolved, dislodged, dismantled, repurposed, whichever you resonate with.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, that piece of safety, security, and certainty. I think for if I take my ex-workaholism as an example, I learned that was the what my dad modeled for me, and he's still working 7 days a week at 70. And I looked at that and I did that for a while because that's what I knew, until I got to the point where I literally broke myself and I knew I couldn't continue it anymore. And then, like you say, that self-awareness piece came in of, oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm repeating a learned pattern, and it isn't working for me because I'm working really hard and I don't have any money. So I need to change things. And I started working with a business coach. So we restructured the whole way of my business, the whole way I priced things, how I was working. And that took a lot of mindset work and a lot of hand holding to move through the absolute terror of doing something completely differently to what I'd had that was working. It wasn't working very efficiently, but it was what I knew. So coming to that safety piece. And the other thing I did was I started to have a look at, because one of the things that drove my constant working was, if I stop, I don't make any money. And it was this fear of not making money, so I can't stop. And I put in place for myself some income protection insurance. So if I'm stopped by not being well, I've got income coming in from a policy, and that soothed the panic within me to be able to go, oh, it's okay. There's a plan B if something goes wrong. And I also had that realization of, if I don't look after my health, I could be permanently broken in some shape or form. So it's actually important to look after that. And it, you know, in having that support and making the changes, suddenly I was working with half the number of clients and I tripled my income. And I totally really changed the way I was doing things.
Because what you've just described is two things. You've described changing the structure. So actually three things. You've described a shift in orientation in how you perceived and looked at your work and your life. You've described changing the structure of your business world and putting in systems, right, to generate some kind of certainty and security. So that's fantastic. But you did say something that was interesting. And what you said was that took a lot of mindset work. Right? And the reason that is the case is because our identity is tied up with what we believe ourselves to be, which is the self that the 4-year-old, 1, 2, 3, 4-year-old manufactured in that narcissistic state of being, right? Where I am the center of the world and everything is me. And these are the limitations of it. And this is what happens when I don't get what I want. Oh, scream, shout, temperable tantrum, 2s and 3s, right? And then what happens is that in that state, most of us are denied what we need because we are being socialized to fit in, right? We're into square pegs, into square holes, because that is what is permitted and allowed. So you can see where when we talk about ancestral patterns, you can see automatically how these ancestral patterns are perpetuated and how entrenched people can become and cultures can become in their approach to life, because without that structure and without that orientation, they don't know who they are. People don't know who they are. So the biggest challenge that we have is actually allowing ourselves to deconstruct in order to reconstruct. And for most approaches, it takes time and a lifetime. Luckily, there are more rapid ways of doing the work, which is literally working with the neurology and the energy of the body rather than working with the mind. So this whole concept of mindset sometimes gets in the way of change. And I just wanted to make that a really strong point, because it is people could be a lot happier, a lot faster if they let go of mindset and understood mindfulness, which is about self-awareness and how to reorientate oneself and change the structure as you did, and then set up systems. So well done you.
Thanks very much. It was a sort of a very interesting period of my life of breaking out of these patterns. Interesting that you talk about the 4-year-old self, because what came up for me was the reason I had worked so ridiculously, apart from the fact that that's how I knew to make money as an entrepreneur, was just to work really, really hard at it. I also did define myself by being super busy, because I had made the connection of, if I'm super busy, it means I'm super successful, which in hindsight now, it doesn't mean either at all. If you're if you're so busy, you're at the point of burnout, you're not charging enough, is the simple thing. And you need to restructure your business, because that's not success in my view. And it's interesting that but it came from people pleasing, not wanting to say no to people, And those I recognize as some sort of childhood patternings coming up.
There is something, again, I just want to leap in, if you don't mind. You said something else also that I would like to just question a little bit for the listeners. And you said, you know, if you're working this hard and you're broke, or you're not earning enough money, or not charging enough, that's one piece, right? But what it comes down to in the first instance is not understanding your own value, and not understanding what your clients and customers are going to receive, so that you cannot convey, you are not conveying from the presence of your energy, as you and I were discussing earlier about, you know, shifting from an everyday thing to a luxury product. Your customers do not understand how to value you. They do not understand what they're getting out of it. You don't understand what they want, and you therefore don't understand how they could value it and why it's priceless. So it's not a matter of putting your prices up at all. It's a complete change in attitude, and in what you're delivering and how you're delivering to the person that can receive you.
Yep.
Right. So the other mistake that people make, and coaches make, therapists make, is they think that they are here to serve others. You are not. Sorry, I'll be a bit controversial. You are on this planet to serve yourself. And if you do not know what makes you happy, what expands your energy, what helps you grow, what brings your light into the world, what has you be soul present in your everyday life, you will always struggle.
Yeah.
Right? You will always struggle. And once again, you know, we are taught to not serve ourselves. So the way that people do best in the world is to be self-serving with an intention to whatever it is you want to do. So I find that I naturally support others. So I've been able to transform the energy of being obligated to support my family and keep everybody safe, which was very much a childhood thing, and to make myself indispensable so that I would be safe, right? And that is, then you become a professional people pleaser. And I was absolutely known for being, if you need anything, go ask Maya. This is before the internet or anything else. People used to say, if you want anything or need anything, ask her, because she'll find a way. Right? Because I became indispensable. What I didn't understand is that my true nature is that. My true nature, I didn't have to force it or try and keep myself safe, because my true nature is to be naturally supportive and helpful and kind and nurturing. And when I say nurturing, not just from a Mother Earth perspective, but I mean to have a space, to create a space, to be a space in which people find and discover themselves and grow and expand naturally. So there's no force. And when there's no force in your life, when you're coming from that soul expansive space, and it's present on earth, because the unmet need egoic self is not the primary self. Your whole self is the primary self. Life gets much easier. Does that mean that you're ignoring your inner child? No, in fact, it's the other way around, because by paying attention to it from that space, the inner child gets what it needs, it calms down. I think most adults don't realize that they're actually living, that their inner child, or their unmet needs of their inner child, is actually leading the pack. When you look at most 4-year-olds, I often say to many adults, you know, do you want that 4-year-old to be creating your future? Because that's where you're at. And if you're supposedly self-sabotaging, in that language of self-sabotaging, as opposed to restoring your unmet needs or fulfilling your unmet needs, allowing yourself, instead of being under-resourced as a child, to be resourced, right? If you're not in that space, then your 4-year-old is building your future for you, and therefore you'll never be free.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I'm so glad you brought the point up about valuing yourself, because it's interesting. As soon as I put my prices up. And actually, I had to white knuckle through the process of doing that. It was awful. It was so difficult because I was not pleasing everybody because I was too expensive for people all of a sudden. But as soon as I valued myself, my clients valued me more, and my business has kind of grown exponentially in a far better direction than when I was showing up with the energy of, you're just one other client I'm having to bang in a day where I've got 4 or 5 photo shoots, and I'm coming at it with a frantic energy. Nobody respected me. I had the most difficult clients I have ever had when I was in that space of showing up, not valuing them either. Actually, it was a two-way street with that. And I think this is such an important piece. And that comes down to doing the inner work, challenging these beliefs we have about ourselves and how we don't value ourselves, and making the necessary changes. So my last question for you, and I'm quite curious, if I had come to you 6-7 years ago with these beliefs of, I have to work really hard to make money, and instead of doing the mindset shift work, which was hard, what kind of energetic work would you have started doing with me instead of, let's work on your mindset? I'm curious about your methodology with this.
Because all thought is driven by emotion. And many people will tell you that is not the case, but it is, right? So I am an emotional alchemist. I cannot help myself. All right, I am naturally shamanic. I feel everything. I have a capacity to, some people would say, oh, you're an empath. I don't think that being an empath is particularly healthy, so I would question that. However, I have the capacity to notice, as you have experienced yourself when we've talked, what is going on in your body, the emotion, where the emotion is stuck in the body. So instead of approaching you through your mind, we would have started with, and how does that feel? And what is it? When we speak to that part of you that feels that way, what is that part seeking? Right? Not what does it believe, what is it seeking? What is it empty of? Where is it under-resourced? And then we would begin to work with the energy, the somatic energy of the body, which is the access point. I would call it your oversoul, right? Your what some people would call a super conscious, the part of you that knows all of you, from your divine spark down to every lifetime that you are, in my book, simultaneously living, right? And there's a couple of other things that I work with. So there's the consciousness of the planet itself. There's the intelligence of your body. And we would not even work to change it. It is a conversation, and the conversation itself unravels what is stuck, because it is coming from a different place. And then we create within the body. It's just like, well, are there any other parts that are involved in this under-resourcefulness or these unmet needs? Let's bring them together. Let's create a treatment team. Let's understand where the flow can flow, right? Where it can flow, let's create flow. And then let's see what happens. And generally, that sounds quite long and protracted. But I have had people work with me who have come to me because they have an addiction. We've had a conversation and they've gone away and never had another drink.
Amazing.
They've stopped smoking. And it isn't always a one-off. You know, there are different capacities. The body itself, the psyche itself of any individual has a different capacity. Where there's been a lot of violence or a lot of shock, generally we have to take things more slowly, because the nervous system can go back into shock, and then people can have a crisis. So that's the other thing, I guess, that happens with me, because we are working with your energy, not my process. I have a process that feels in. It's very obvious when someone is getting overcooked. because I have 30 years experience of feeling in. So I can go, right, we have to pull back a bit, we have to think, we have to do this, we have to do that. That's enough now. So sometimes something can go because it's relatively superficial, and other times we have to go drip, drip, drip. But it's a very different approach to a mind approach. It's a very sensory approach to healing, and it's very fast.
Yes.
I mean, even when it's slow, it's very fast because you're not wrestling with the conflict in the mind.
Yeah. Brilliant. It did answer the question. That was brilliant. And I think it's just, it feels like a much more harmonious approach, and it feels like an approach that's a lot less hard work, because I think fighting with your own thoughts and going, you need to stop now, I'm going to replace you with something else, is quite exhausting. It works, but it is a very intellectually exhausting process. And then one also has to do some of the work, the inner work and the somatic work as well. I think it's about treating the whole body as a system, isn't it? And the somatic piece is very interesting.
It is. And what's fascinating is again, but because people talk about mindset, and they talk about, from the old Freudian days and the Jungian days, everything's about the mind more than the emotion, at least, and I know things have changed a lot over the years. And the problem is that emotions do not think. You cannot translate an emotion or a physiological sensation and move it into the mind and say, this is what I'm experiencing. You have to stay with the sensation, and you have to be with the emotion. And when you're in that space and you're then working with the higher energies, higher, lower, different energies, the soul orientated energies, there is a window of reconciliation that opens within the amygdala, in the center of your brain, in the limbic system. And that window allows for change. And it's particularly powerful when there's anxiety, PTSD, experiences, separation anxiety, imposter syndrome, and various different types of self-sabotage, because they're not. It's simply something that's locked in place that you made a decision about before you were 4 years old.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been really enlightening and very, very interesting. And I'm sure for everybody listening that this will have been really, really great for them as well. Maya, for anybody who would like to find out about your work, where's the easiest place for them to find you online?
The easiest place would be www.maya, spelled Maya, Mendoza, Mendoza.com.
Brilliant. And I'll put the links to your books and everything in the show notes as well as the website link. And thank you very much again for spending time with me today. This has been a really, really wonderful conversation.
It's been awesome. And thank you for your curiosity. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening, folks. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. I will see you on the next one. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please share with your friends and be sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. To find out more about my one-on-one coaching, please visit my website, which is emmaobriencoach.com. And remember, folks, when life gives you lemons, you can always choose another fruit. See you next time.